U.S. aid is fanning the flames of Venezuela's political crisis after opposition leader Juan Guaido selected last Saturday as the deadline for food and supplies to cross the borders from Brazil to Colombia and Colombia into Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro blocked the truckloads of aid and shut down the borders before severing diplomatic ties with Colombia. Maduro, who is locked in a standoff with Guaido, denies that a humanitarian crisis exists and says aid efforts are part of a U.S. ploy to orchestrate a coup. Guaido declared himself interim president during a rally on January the 23rd, a move the U.S. immediately recognized, with other U.S. allies quickly following suit. Now, genuine gesture of support or a Trojan horse? What are the U.S.'s true objectives behind the aid? And with plans for Guaido and U.S. Vice President Mike Pence to meet on Monday, what bumps are ahead in Venezuela's rocky road to stability? Joining me for the discussion are Victor Gao, Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization in Beijing, Richard Weitz, a Senior Fellow from the Hudson Institute of Washington, D.C., and Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, joining us via Skype from Texas. Gentlemen, welcome to the point. Now, the Trump administration has sent nearly 200 metric tons of humanitarian aid to the Colombia-Venezuela border for distribution inside Venezuela, and it is said that the aid is part of a $20 million US package the administration announced after recognizing Guaido as Venezuela's interim president. Victor, what do you think is the U.S.'s intention behind the activeness in sending this humanitarian aid, even if the Maduro government has rejected such aid?
Well, first of all, the situation in Venezuela is really deteriorating, and it may completely get out of control. And eventually, if worse is to come out of the worst, the people in Venezuela will suffer more. Now, secondly, the U.S.-Venezuelan relations have been hostile for many, many years. And in this round, what the U.S. government is doing is really instigating more turmoil and instability in Venezuela. And I think the Venezuela government right now has the complete sovereign right to decide whether they want to accept aid or reject the aid, and the form and the format by which such foreign aid should be accepted. So I think it's completely up to the Venezuela government to decide. Further, in this very uncertain and turbulent period of time, foreign government aid, if there is any political implication to it, should probably go through the United Nations rather than directly going into the country, which may actually instigate more instability and turbulence in the country. So I think we need to be very careful following the situation.
Yeah, some people are saying there is a real humanitarian crisis in the country. There is medicine that's scarce. There is even toothpaste that's scarce. Obviously, people are suffering. So why shouldn't more humanitarian aid be allowed in the country? The more the merrier.
There is a humanitarian crisis in many parts of the world, in Haiti, for example, which is much closer to the United States. And I don't see any particular sign of the U.S. government offering very much of humanitarian assistance to the people in Haiti, who are in much more need of foreign help, for example. So let's basically see how the situation in Venezuela can develop, and sovereignty of Venezuela should be strictly observed.
Dr. Weitz, what is your take on the situation? Do you think there are different intentions, there is a political pretext to the humanitarian convoys being sent, not just through the Colombia-Venezuela border, but also through other border checkings as well?
Well, in a way, both sides see the humanitarian assistance, economic resources as important for their path to political power, if you will. So the Maduro government, what it does is it uses the aid it receives and other administrative resources to privilege those people, those groups which are important for it to stay in power, the military and so on. And then you see a lot of people not receiving sufficient aid. The U.S. sees the aid as a way to address that, but also to weaken the legitimacy of the government and to perhaps encourage the military and others to defect And so in this sense, it's a similar policy, even if it's coming from different people.
So who gets to decide what kind of policy a country can adopt when the government, when the administration is still constitutionally recognized as the legitimate government of the country? Who gets to decide what to do, Dr. Weitz?
Right. So normally, if everybody recognized the government as having been legitimately elected and having the interests of its people at heart, then this kind of aid would be unacceptable. But there have been a number of countries who felt the previous elections were not fair, and the current government is not legitimate, and so therefore they don't respect its demand that it control all aid flows.
All right. Daniel, let me go to you. What is your position on this issue? Of course, for a sovereign country, the government should have the right to decide what kind of aid they take in or what kind of aid they don't. But Dr. Weitz's point is that if the government is not 100% legitimate, then it's a different story. What's your take?
Well, the question is, do we have sovereignty or don't we have sovereignty? If a government is sovereign, we don't get to decide whether they're legitimate or not. And the main issue here is the fact that Venezuela does accept plenty of aid. It received, I think, 900 tons of aid from Russia, China, and Turkey just not long ago. So it's really a propaganda effort to try to say that Venezuela is refusing aid. What it is refusing aid from a country that has openly and actively said that it is determined to overthrow its government, and that aid is being delivered by the military of that country. I know of no government in the world who would accept aid in those terms. And if it's simply about providing food and medicine to the people of Venezuela, I think, as your first speaker mentioned, why not simply donate that aid to the United Nations or a third country like Russia who's able to get aid in and send the aid in if that's the issue. So it's clearly not about aid, it's about the weaponization of aid, and the whole operation is being headed.
Okay, it seems that we lost the connection there, but we got the gist of his idea. Dr. Victor Gao here, it seems that still there are some information that is murky at this moment. For instance, we have reports about the truckload of aid, or 2 trucks, being set on fire, and the opposition leader has said that it was the Maduro government who has done that to refuse help to the people who are desperately needing it. At this moment, do we know what really happened?
I personally do not know, and I think it's an evolving and developing story. I hope all the countries outside of Venezuela will completely respect the sovereignty of Venezuela. If, for example, the United States insist that they can deny Mr. Maduro and recognize Mr. Guaido, I think probably Venezuela can also refuse to recognize the legitimacy of President Donald Trump and recognize Hillary Clinton, especially when the Russian investigation is still unfolding, for example. And this will put the whole world upside down. I think there must be a process, and I think sovereignty needs to be respected. Whether you like it or not, you need to really respect the Venezuelans to deal with whatever problems they may have as their own internal issue, and foreign countries should stay away from interfering in the internal affairs of Venezuela. And this is China's bottom line, and I hope this will also be the bottom line for the United States. Otherwise, you are going down the slippery slope and you do not know where to stop, and the world will be turned upside down.
Dr. Weitz, you want to react to that?
I agree, sovereignty is important, but in some cases, as in Syria, Afghanistan, perhaps Venezuela, as Victor Gao said, it's still a developing situation. It creates these massive refugee flows, border clashes, and so on, so it becomes an international threat to peace. Now, as you mentioned in the package, the Vice President Pence and the leaders of the regional groups are meeting today, and they're talking about different, some of the issues where we are, how to get the humanitarian aid there, how to negotiate with the existing government. I mean, perhaps using the UN is a good idea for aid distributions. The U.S. and Venezuela, despite the governments, despite their dispute, are talking with each other. We know they've recently agreed to extend allowing their official representatives, their diplomats, to stay in each other's embassies for a while. So we may see a negotiated solution at some point to the crisis, and I think that would probably be best of all.
Well, I hope that is definitely the case, but from what we have heard from U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he basically denounced Maduro's refusal to let the humanitarian assistance reach Venezuela, and he called Maduro a sick tyrant, and he said that what kind of a sick tyrant stops food from getting to hungry people? The images of burning trucks filled with aid are sickening. I do not know, first of all, by sending these trucks, knowing that they will be rejected at the borders, and then giving this kind of a public discourse to describe the leader of Venezuela. Do you think this is conducive to the situation, Dr. Weitz?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say anything that the Secretary of State was inaccurate. I mean, the opponents of Maduro do consider his election legitimate, and would refer to him as a dictator, and would complain about the challenges we're seeing on the border and so on. But as we know, and we're going to see again this week, I think, in Korea, the Trump administration's negotiating style is to use maximum pressure and then negotiate an more acceptable settlement. We may see this with the China trade deal, as you discussed in the beginning of the program. At some point, we hope to see this in the case of Iran. And so Venezuela would fall into that pattern. There could be a transitional government, there could be a joint government, could be a part of the deal could be international provision of aid. So I wouldn't necessarily exclude a better outcome at this point.
But again, the pattern that we have seen, I do not know whether it's always going to work out. I mean, okay, you exert maximum pressure and hoping that things doesn't spoil over to reach any undesirable consequences. Dr. Victor Gao here, do you see any problem with the U.S.? Not that with the DPRK it probably is working, it probably is, but does that mean that should be the way how we approach situations in the world?
No, first of all, I don't think the U.S. position and Donald Trump's position with regard to the denuclearization issue of DPRK is working at all. I don't think they will be achieving the goal of denuclearization at all by any measurement. So I think President Donald Trump probably is diluting himself and diluting the rest of the world and the political establishment in the United States and the American people in particular. I don't think he will deliver denuclearization anytime soon about the DPRK's nuclear weapon program. Whatever pressure he has put upon, it doesn't work. Even though we congratulate the fact that the two leaders will meet in Vietnam anytime soon, and China is very much behind such a summit between Donald Trump and Mr. Kim of DPRK. Now, as for the pressure on Venezuela, eventually I think the U.S. prestige in the world will be more and more diluted and eroded. Why? Because people will see that the United States is really manhandling many other countries in the world, and in particular, for example, even including China in terms of the trade war between the two countries. And for a country like Venezuela, which is very much of a Latin American country, eventually other people in Latin American countries will realize that they do not need a very abrasive and arms-twisting Yankee in their backyard.
We're going to leave it there. Victor Gao and Richard Weitz. And many thanks also to Daniel McAdams, whom we lost during the course of the conversation. Thanks for watching.